New World is a massively multiplayer online role-playing game developed by Amazon Game Studios. It released to massive hype, hitting almost 1 million concurrent players online at one time, but has since seen its player base drop off. Is New World going to be a game worth playing in 2022? Let's talk about it. You start the game out on a ship on your way to explore an uncharted island surrounded by mystery and danger in the pursuit of treasure. Upon arriving on the island, you quickly discover why so little is known about it to the outside world. You wash up on the shores of this new world and need to use your newfound power to survive not only the beasts that awaited you on the island, but also the other people that found themselves washed up on its shores like you did. At the time of this recording, New World is in its first year of release. I feel it's incredibly important to note this because people have a tendency to compare brand new MMOs with existing MMOs that have been out for nearly a decade or more. If we compare New World Year 1 to Final Fantasy Year 1 or even Elder Scrolls Online Year 1, you see that most of its problems aren't unique. Final Fantasy's launch was so unsalvageable that they nuked the world and shut the game down so they could finish and re-release it. Elder Scrolls Online suffered a similar launch with bugs, duping, and a complete lack of endgame content for PvE players. Both Square Enix and ZeniMax Online Studios would have to flip the table over completely, but in the end, both games would go on to earn positive ratings on Steam, despite their disastrous launches. In other words, New World's problems are par for the MMO course. Now, I'm not defending the practice of releasing unfinished games, but I do think it's important to remember that MMOs are games that live and die based on how well they are supported after launch, rather than how well they launch in the first place. With that caveat aside, this video is not asking the question of, will New World be worth playing in 10 years? It's asking if New World is worth playing in 2022. So with that in mind, I'm going to go over what New World is doing right, what it's doing wrong, and if it's going to be worth the $40 price tag in 2022. In this video, I'll be covering all of the things that are important to the success and enjoyment of any MMO to help you decide if New World is the right MMO for you. We will be having an honest and open discussion about New World's solo content, group content, PvP, combat, cosmetic customization, population health, and monetization. First, let's talk about solo content. Let's start with the broad scope, the world design of the game. The first and most fundamental piece of any MMO is the world it takes place in. This is something the game does masterfully. Amazon Game Studios built a world that is amazing and fun to explore. Combining that beautiful world and perhaps the best sound design of any MMO I've ever played left me feeling immersed almost immediately. Then add to that the scale of the world. New World does an amazing job of making you feel small and making the world feel massive. It really is jaw-dropping at times and is something few MMOs have achieved to such a degree. In other words, the world is relentlessly immersive, allowing you to climb up almost anything and go almost anywhere. On top of that, it allows you to gather just about anything you stumble across. And it does all of this seamlessly, without zone walls or load screens. You can open the game and run from one end of the world to the other. And because there are no mounts, and the teleport currency is also used for crafting, sometimes you will find yourself doing exactly that, for better or worse. The game received a lot of flack for these long runs and has since begun the process of easing the burden of getting from A to B, but I think this balance still has some ways to go before it finds itself in a spot that most of today's MMO population will be satisfied with. Maybe the second most levied complaint against the game was monster diversity. No matter where you went, you often found yourself fighting the same guy, perhaps in a different outfit or perhaps holding a different weapon, but it was the same undead pirate. It didn't take long to notice this as you entered a beautiful new zone and ran into that all too familiar enemy yet again. Fortunately, AGS has acknowledged this issue and stated that they are currently working hard to add more mob diversity throughout the entire game so that the new and veteran players can experience more mob diversity no matter where they are in the game. This was a massive complaint from the community and it sounds like Amazon heard it loud and clear. This is important because this is a theme you will see a lot in this review. Amazon seems to be acknowledging the game's failings and is actively addressing them, and with haste. This gives me hope for New World's future. As we continue on the topic of solo content, it's important we touch on crafting. Crafting offers the solo player the ability to completely rely on themselves for amazing gear. If they want something, they can simply level up crafting and farm the materials to make it. It's a deep but digestible crafting system that feels very rewarding to level up. I thoroughly enjoyed the time I spent interacting with it, but I did feel it was perhaps too grindy in its current iteration, as high-level items still required me to go back and farm a bunch of low-level materials again. But what about the story and the lore, which are so important to any single-player experience? Does New World have a compelling world with captivating lore? Well, I found the lore behind the game to be actually amazing. with one caveat: I couldn't find enough of it. I can't wait to learn more about this island and more of its history. They've created a fascinating world. This was another complaint I heard a lot, that the main story quests just did not fill the RPG needs of many players. It wasn't that the story was bad, just that there wasn't enough of it. It was very light on details, and much of it was scattered on notes throughout the worlds. I would love for the solo questing experience to have more work put into it, because the world is amazing, one of the most beautiful I've ever been able to explore in any MMO. The blend of ancient technology with a dash of sci-fi sprinkled on top is fantastic. I couldn't get enough of it. One of my favorite side quests was one where I had to help an NPC figure out how old some of the structures on the island were. I couldn't wait to figure out how long Eternum had been here, hiding all of these crazy secrets. The answer blew my mind. One thing I appreciated about the questing was that many of the quests were voice acted. I find that in this day and age, if the MMO doesn't think the dialogue is important enough to voice act, then I probably won't think it's important enough to read. The voice acting was top notch, I just hope they add more of it. Speaking of questing, another complaint was lack of variety in the quests. Every MMO is full of fetch quests. You're either fetching food, gear, or information, no matter what the quest is. But some MMOs do a better job of disguising the fetch quests as more than that, so that you forget that you've been sent here to kill or gather a few things before returning home. The saving grace here was that every quest was really just an excuse to explore a new piece of the island. Every battle is an opportunity to play around with whichever weapon type is currently equipped and level it up. I enjoyed solo questing in this game, not because the quest was well crafted, but because the world it sent me out into was. Now, if you're the type of MMO player who laments the very thought of grouping with other players to get things done, it's worth noting that the story quest does require you to group with other players once in a while, though rarely. Sometimes it will force you into a dungeon, and other times it will ask you to take down a boss that is not soloable. For me personally, these were some of my favorite pieces of content in the game, but due to the game's lack of group finder, I wonder how difficult it will be for new players to find groups for that content long after the masses have moved past it. But speaking of group content, let's talk about that next. New World features the holy trinity of healer, tank, and damage dealers when it comes to group PvE content. The game has dungeons, which it calls expeditions. It also has some group content out in the overland or non-instance world. Group content is both one of the game's strengths and one of its weaknesses. The early dungeons are very simple and straightforward, but their difficulty quickly ramps up each time you enter a new one for the first time. The first major problem? The friction for entering dungeons needs to be lowered. The dungeons were perhaps my favorite content. That is, when I was actually able to do them. Grouping up for dungeons is a lot of work for two reasons. The first is that the game does not yet have a group finder system for group content. While most of today's major MMOs also launched without a group finder, they have all since added one. Is it smart for MMOs to keep launching without group finders in their dungeons? I wasn't sure leading up to New World, but then after playing it, I feel like the answer is no. The dungeons are so fun, but sometimes my friends aren't available to play the game when I am, which means I can't do the dungeon without having to scour zone chat for other people that share my same plight. The likelihood of my guild members being at the same point in the game as me and needing the same dungeon as me at the same time as me was not high enough. The end result for me, I just haven't really participated in one of my favorite parts of the game very much. The other problem is dungeons require you to craft keys to get in. At launch, these keys required an insane grind to craft, so even the people with friends online weren't running the dungeons. Fortunately, this was another item that Amazon is already working to address and is continuing to tweak, as they realized dungeon participation was abysmal, not because people didn't like the dungeons, but because they didn't like having to spend hours farming materials necessary to make a key just to enter the dungeon. To make matters worse, the keys are single use and consumed upon entering. I'm not too fond of the concept of having a single use key to enter a dungeon. If you don't want me to run it too many times, then simply time gate it, or perhaps make it so that you have to farm the key if you want to run it more than once a day. The reason this frustrated me is that the dungeons are brilliant. They are gorgeous, jaw-dropping, and full of great mechanics. Let us enjoy them. It's 2022 and the average MMO player has already experienced the niceties that come with the current popular MMOs, and it's hard to take this step backwards with them on this topic. But once again, this is something they are aware of and they're working on, so I'm optimistic they'll find the right answer. Another group PvE mode worth mentioning is the invasions. Invasions are perhaps the most unique PvE content I've experienced in an MMO, well, ever. During an invasion, 50 players tried to defend a fort from a massive, and I do mean massive, NPC invasion. These are quite the spectacle and a ton of fun, with some great rewards to boot. At launch, these invasions absolutely destroyed the community, but as time passed and the community as a whole grew stronger, the battles have become much more winnable. It's something that feels really unique to New World, and I can't wait to see how the system grows and evolves over time. Now let's talk about PvP. New World PvP is amazing and perhaps the best MMO PvP experience out right now. This isn't terribly surprising because for a long time it was going to be a PvP game, but for the last year it has focused much more on finding a balance between PvP and PvE content. In some MMOs like Final Fantasy XIV, the PvP feels like a tacked on minigame that has little to do with the MMO itself. In New World, the PvP is very much woven into the game in a way that promotes player-made alliances and rivalries. You can tell it was integral to the game from the beginning, and it's something I think PvP players will really appreciate. The game features opt-in open world PvP where you can choose to flag up for PvP before leaving town. If you run into someone else who has flagged up, the two of you can engage in some good PvP. The game has some incentives built into it for doing things while flagged for PvP to encourage and reward players for flagging before leaving town. Perhaps the most notable form of PvP in the game is the territory control, where massive 50v50 battles take place between two contesting factions to decide who will own that territory and therefore receive the taxes earned in that zone. It's a fun system with a lot on the line, and it makes it feel like you have much more of an impact on the world around you. And speaking of combat, let's talk about that next. The combat in New World is incredibly engaging. Its use of cooldowns combined with blocking and dodging creates a combat that feels very strategic and impactful. There is a welcome degree of difficulty to the enemies you encounter, especially as you wander into new zones for the first time and the enemies are your level or higher. It makes fights exciting as you level up, and it means you have to try to use the blocking and dodging mechanics to mitigate as much damage as possible so that you're not wasting resources on potions or, even worse, dying. The way combat works is you can equip 2 weapons, and each weapon has its own skill tree. You can equip 3 skills from each skill tree for a total of 6 skills equipped at any one time. You can further customize those abilities by unlocking passives in that tree. The system is a lot of fun. These skill trees and these systems are only going to get deeper and more complex as the game goes forward, or at least I hope that's the case. The skills look amazing. The passives you can unlock to alter them are fun to interact with as well. In combat, your abilities feel impactful and your choices from moment to moment meaningful. The combat in New World was one of my favorite parts of the game, and that is so incredibly important for an MMO. MMOs live and die on their choice of combat. The combat was also a huge part of why I enjoyed the side quests, despite their incredibly repetitive nature. I will note that the game does feature action combat, so if you're used to tab targeting enemies in traditional MMOs like Final Fantasy XIV or WoW, it will take some time to get used to, but once you do, I think it feels great. Next up, cosmetic customization. A huge part of every MMO is making your character look awesome. Let's talk about how New World does with cosmetic customization, starting with the character creation. Character customization was very limited. For a game being released in 2021, there just weren't a lot of options or sliders on the character creation screen by today's standards. I was a little surprised by this, but had no problem creating a character I was happy with. Almost as important as the character's power progression is its cosmetic progression. Like every MMO, New World has a lot of really ugly armor. I mean, you look like that time you were 3 and your mom finally let you dress yourself for the first time. Your mismatched and misshapen gear will often leave you looking a mess. Other MMOs resolve this issue by adding a transmog system that allows you to change the appearance of your armor. But New World currently lacks a proper transmog system. I found a lot of really cool looking gear. The problem was that the gear with the good stats and the gear that looked good were seldom the same piece of gear. And with no way to apply the appearance of the cool looking gear to the functional piece of gear, my character spent most of his days looking, well, like this. This could be remedied very quickly by using the cash shop, if you happen to like one of the outfits sold within. New World is a buy-to-play MMO with no subscription, which means it's going to need to sell desirable things in the cash shop to survive. It will be interesting to see how much of this ends up cannibalizing cosmetic progression, but we'll touch more on this when we get to the monetization section of this video. I hope the current lack of transmog is something Amazon solves sooner than later, because I think it's so important to feel like your character looks cool in an MMO. Once you beat every dungeon, once you hit max level, unlocking epic cosmetics through PvP or PvE content is crucial. It's a way of allowing for progression without allowing for power creep, and it's integral to every MMO. It elevates your attachment to that character and your desire to see it grow stronger. But if you aren't excited about how it looks, all of that is lost. Your character becomes a walking stat stick. Overall, the game does have some really cool looking items. There just isn't a great way to apply those looks to future gear upgrades that you find along the way. Next, population health. Now let's talk about the population health of the game. Are there still a ton of people playing New World? Yes, absolutely. During its opening month, New World had an average of over 400,000 players according to Steam charts. This was absolutely massive. Over the past 30 days, New World has had about an average of 80,000 players online, which is still very respectable. 80,000 average players on Steam may sound small compared to the 400,000 during launch month, but to put that into perspective, here are the Steam charts for the last 30 days. Basically, New World's population is still massive. Even after its decline in players since launch, it is still one of the most popular games in the world today, and easily one of the largest MMOs in the world today. Next, let's talk about monetization. New World monetization is interesting. It's almost too good to be true. It's a buy-to-play game with a strictly cosmetic cash shop at the start. Later, that cash shop will likely sell pay for convenience and pay to advance faster items. There is no subscription. But what does all of this mean for you? Well, basically, this game is a great deal. $40 for unlimited access to an entire MMO and all of that content that comes with it. It's such a good deal that I'm honestly concerned that New World will make enough money to successfully support a massive MMO and the constant content updates required to keep it going. So let's recap. Solo content. The world is second to none. It is one seamless, giant, massive, sprawling, beautiful world. If you can see a place, you can run there. There are no zone walls or load screens to break your immersion. The sound design just adds to this. New World has my favorite sound design of any MMO I've played to date. Every sound is familiar and yet unique to New World. I don't know how to describe it. They've somehow given you what you expect while mixing into that same sound something you've never heard, and you notice it in a good way. Where New World fell short at launch was that no matter where you went in this massive, beautiful world, you were fighting the exact same mobs. You were doing the same quests. Mob variety and quest variety were lacking. In spite of this deficiency, I had a blast leveling from 1 to 60 because the world was so dang inviting. I almost didn't care what I was doing because I was so excited about where I was going. On top of that, everything I did was leveling something up. The sense of progression in New World is incredibly satisfying, and Amazon is currently working on fixing the issues with the mob and quest variety. Group content. The group content in this game has been one of my favorite parts, but it's held back by its lack of accessibility. Right now, if you don't have friends and you haven't made your way into an active free company, finding groups for the group content you need to do is going to be a bit of a chore. In years past, we would have been okay with this system, but in 2022, we've seen better and we expect better. We have less patience for the prospect of standing around outside of a dungeon hoping to find a group to run it with. We want to log in and do the dungeon, not log in and hope we can find people to run the dungeon with. Like so many problems on this list, this is one I fully expect to be addressed in time. Almost every major MMO out today launched without a group finder and then added it later, and I fully expect New World to do the same. PvP. While the game has been focusing on PvE content as of late, it was going to be a PvP game originally, and for that reason, the PvP portion of this game is a lot of fun. Unlike so many other MMOs, the PvP is not tacked on as some completely unrelated side game. It's not an afterthought. It is a well thought out piece of the game woven into the very fabric that holds it together. It was originally built around the idea that the end game would be PvP, and some people would argue that it still is. As a PvPer, you'll level through the game and get gear so that you can ultimately fight it out for control of the game's territories. The PvP in the game is really impressive, and I can't wait to see how it evolves in the future. It's a brand new MMO and already has perhaps the best PvP of any MMO out today. I think the only problem PvPers will have with the PvP is the amount of work required to get your character combat ready enough to participate in a meaningful way. Combat in New World is one of my favorite parts. As long as I was fighting something around my level or above my level, there was usually a decent challenge involved. With all but a few overtuned weapons, I actually had to focus on dodging attacks and engaging in the game's mechanics. The combat has been compared to Dark Souls because you are highly incentivized to avoid taking damage. Enemies will actually chunk down your health bar with hard-hitting but forecasted abilities. The fighting was so fun, I often forget that I was fighting that same damn pirate again. And fortunately, once they finish adding mob diversity, that won't be an issue anymore. Next, cosmetic customization. In a game that is otherwise gorgeous and immersive in every way imaginable, the cosmetic customization for my character was lacking. The character creation screen is simple, but more problematic than that is the lack of transmog so that I can equip the appearance of those really cool items I find throughout my adventures. Of course, this could be by design, as the game seems intent on deriving most of its profits from the cosmetics in the cash shop due to its lack of a subscription. I wonder how or if the lack of transmog system will be remedied. I wonder how they will support cosmetic progression and the activities that accompany it in an MMO. As for the population health, well, while the health of the population isn't what it was at launch, it's still firmly sitting as one of the largest MMOs of all time. Make no mistake, the player base is still absolutely massive. I expect that the population will expand again once they release their first expansion. The quality of that first expansion is going to tell us a lot about the direction and the future of New World. Finally, we've got monetization. The monetization model in New World seems almost too good to be true. It's a AAA MMO. It's certainly one of its best selling points, $40 and you have unlimited access to a AAA MMO. But my concern is that I can't think of any MMO that created quality content over long periods of time on this monetization model. The two largest MMOs, WoW and Final Fantasy, both have a mandatory subscription that allows them to churn out endless content required of an MMO. ESO has an optional subscription that is more or less mandatory for anyone that takes the game seriously, and to supplement the people that aren't subscribing, it has added an incredibly aggressive cash shop, complete with loot crates. So how is New World going to survive on a buy-to-play model with an underwhelming cash shop? I'm not sure, but again, this generous policy is great for you, the player and the consumer, as it makes it all but certain that you're going to get your money's worth out of your purchase. Ultimately, New World's biggest flaw is that it's a brand new MMO, and it has launched with all the same problems that new MMOs always launch with. There were bugs, and there were exploits, and there was duping, but I can't think of an MMO launch that didn't have all of those things, and Amazon Game Studios has been fixing all of those problems while also addressing player feedback. In my opinion, the game where it's at right now is incredibly fun. The bones are strong. That is something I keep finding myself saying. The bones are strong. All AGS has to do is expand on it and add a much deeper and more diverse endgame loop, and this will be a game with a massive audience for years to come. I thoroughly enjoyed playing my way through the game, doing all of the quests and just about every side quest the game had while exploring every inch of Eternum. My playtime did cut back when I hit max level, however, as the endgame loop once again fell victim to the same problems that plague every new MMO. I've played MMO launches before, so I saw this coming, and I fully expect this problem will be addressed with time, as the developers add more systems and more content to the game that deepen and broaden the endgame loop. They have an entire new zone coming out soon, and I can't wait to explore it. In its current state, as a PvEer, you have at least a few hundred hours of content to enjoy. As a PvPer, you have potentially endless content as you engage with territory control and other forms of PvP in the game. If you can get a friend or two to play through the game with you, it will be all the more fun, as it is an MMO and it'll make jumping into dungeons that much easier. Amazon Game Studios has a ton of content planned for this game, and I think this game has the potential to continue to be an MMO powerhouse if they continue to support it the way they have so far. Is New World worth playing in 2022? Yeah, absolutely. Just don't expect it to have 10 years worth of content waiting for you. It's a brand new MMO that's not even a year old, but what it does have so far is truly impressive. If you're looking for something fun to play, if you're looking for a world to get lost in, go ahead and pick it up and give it a try. If you enjoyed this video, please consider liking and subscribing for more MMO content. I just want to give a massive shout out to my YouTube members for supporting the channel. If you want to become a YouTube member and you want to know what benefits come with that, be sure to check the link in the description below. If you ever want to hang out with someone else who loves MMOs, swing by my Twitch stream over at twitch.tv/luckyghost. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.